Yo guys, Punkrat another video. So Classic has been out for a good while at this point, and a lot of my videos recently have been going over the last 2 months, analyzing different little aspects about this new vanilla story that we've embarked on, and giving you guys my opinion, like the last video, on how I feel about the game so far. Now, original vanilla was such a damn long time ago, basically almost 15 years at this point. I feel like we've had enough of a sample size from Classic now to really contrast the two and talk about the major differences, at least the ones that stick out to me. I've seen and also made a video in the past talking about the differences between private servers and the Classic WoW beta, and I'll most likely revisit that topic soon since there's a lot more differences that have surfaced since August 26th, but I haven't seen much talking about or covering original vanilla versus the Classic WoW experience. So let's do that. Without further ado, here's the biggest differences between original vanilla and Classic WoW. Let's get into it. Alright, so the first one is something that I've been talking about, especially with the release of maul. In the last video, I covered this a little bit, but it's basically the economy. So if you played on private servers before or in vanilla, original vanilla back in the day, you probably noticed that the economy moves at a relatively slow pace. With private servers, the more experienced the player base got over the years, it moved at a faster and faster pace. Like Nostalrius was really quick, Black Lotus was 100 plus gold pretty much right off the bat. But Classic WoW has moved really quickly. The gold has inflated incredibly. Of course, when it comes to the supply demand curve, general mats and stuff for leveling up professions is still really cheap, but in general, people have accumulated very large pools of gold. Frost Adams, for example, has 13,000. This is because we have so many efficient gold farms. We've also seen some new ones surface. Like in maul East, for instance, people are doing solo jump runs as Warlock, which is something that I've personally never seen before. And I also never saw that Zul'Farrak mage run that was using that sort of evading bug with all the zombies. But that's really not the only factor. There's also other factors. The next one is obviously layering. Layering has allowed people to sort of abuse it, especially in the early days, to get tons of Black Lotus. It's allowed people greater access to more mobs, more recipes, more materials, and in general, I'd say it's sort of inflated the market in a certain way and also had maybe an opposite effect where it's made things cheaper. And the third way I'd say the economy has been affected, or the economy is different, is in the way that you could pretty much predict the future. Back in original vanilla, you didn't know what was coming in the next patch. It was hard to say, oh, living essences are going to go up here because of this pattern. This specific herb is going to be more expensive because people are going to need this flask or this potion in the next phase. All of the mats for epic mounts for warlocks and paladins that you're able to unlock once maul is released, you could have invested in those before maul hit. So people are sort of ahead of the curve, and I guess you could see the future in a certain way, or the future is written. These are all major factors that have changed the way the economy plays from Classic in contrast to the vanilla counterpart. Alright, so this next one is raid preparedness. And this again has many different levels to it. The first one, which we can kind of tie into the first point that I was speaking about, the economy, and of course layering, how that affected the economy, is consumables. If you look at raid footage from back in the day, it was pretty rare that you would see somebody with full world buffs, full consumables, pretty much everything that you could imagine, even talking about the top guilds like Curse and the like. Nowadays though, people just blast on this aspect of the game. People are doing maul, getting all their DM buffs, they've got head pop, they've got songflower, they've got every single consumable potion that you could imagine, maybe a flask of food buff on top of that, and we're just speed clearing through these raids. We've become incredibly efficient and effective at what we do. This of course has to do with a couple factors, the first being that we pretty much know all of the raids. Everything's been data mined, we know exactly what we're going into, there's no surprises. The next thing is the player base has just gone to another level where people are just way better gamers than they were back then. They have better hardware, there's better resources out there, add-ons, everything that you could possibly need to perform at a high level. And this has enabled us to pretty much perfect raid scenarios when it comes to fights, like I just stated, but not only that, when it comes to raid composition. People know exactly how to build the perfect raid for whatever they need to do at the time. If you're speed clearing through Molten Core, for instance, like that 17-minute Molten Core run that I'm always referencing to, that was pretty much full melee, just cleaving through the entire raid with full consumes and full world buffs. Now in relation to raid preparedness, we've also seen some interesting sort of quirky builds or quirky playstyles that were never really a thing in vanilla, and the first one that comes to mind is the dual wield tanking. Now this one I want to make my own section for it. I could have just latched it on to raid preparedness, but I feel like it deserves its own section because it goes quite deep and it affects the game, I'd say, heavily enough to where it merits its own point. So dual wield tanking is a Fury / prop build where your main tank is wearing half Fury gear and half tanking gear, and tanking with dual wield weapons, so a weapon in each hand. This allows your tank to pull really good damage, and if your group is good enough, his survivability is pretty much not hindered, especially if he's got full consumables and a stone shield elixir applied. So you could imagine, okay, your tank's doing more damage, that increases the DPS in the raid, pretty cool, but that's really not why it's important. It affects the raid on a macro level. The first thing is, he can AoE tank much better than a prot warrior because his cleaves are absolutely decimating mobs, and he has a much bigger pool of rage to just pretty much try to get everything onto him and do big numbers to everything. But the single most important thing is TPS, or threat per second. When your tank is pulling more damage, it means he's pulling more threat, and threat is very finicky in Classic, so when your tank is able to absolutely blast on TPS, it allows your entire raid to worry less about aggro and do more damage themselves. Specifically Warlocks, this is really important, and of course Fury Warriors. This is really what enables people to clear raids at a really fast world record breaking pace, is having a dual wield tank who can pull so much threat that the whole raid doesn't have to worry about anything, especially when your main tank has world buffs and full consumables. You will not pull threat off of him, and when Thunder Fury comes, it's going to be even harder to pull threat off that guy, and that's the reason why dual wield tanks deserve their own spot on this list. This is one of the biggest changes to speed clearing or clearing effectively through raids, I'd say. So this next one is related to PvP, and even more detail, it's about professions. We're talking about engineering. Now you might be thinking, well, Vertina's PvP video and all of the PvP montages from back in the day, they all had engineering. Sure, it was known, at least by a small percentage of the community, especially the people that were grinding to rank 14, that engineering was the best PvP profession that you can have. But it wasn't prevalent. A lot of people back then would skip professions entirely and just never have gold, and others would opt for something else. Nowadays, whether it's PvE or PvP, all main raiders and all hardcore PvP players have engineering. It's almost universal. Everybody has engineering. The word has spread, the gospel has been spoken, and people understand engineering and its value to the game. Not only in PvP like I just stated, but also in speed clearing. This is one of the biggest things that you might notice. If you played back in 2005, it was pretty rare to get grenaded. Every now and then it would happen, but it wasn't constant. Nowadays, every world PvP fight that you get into, there's kind of always a grenade involved. This is a big change fostered by the player base that I really enjoy, to be honest. I feel like engineering is such a cool profession in Classic, and adds so much depth to the 1v1 combat that you engage in. I personally just finished getting all of my gadgets, and I'm having so much fun in World PvP or duels, constantly switching my trinkets and what am I going to use in this fight, or trying to break combat and get another trinket on. And of course, rocket helming my enemy and aim shotting them is super fun. And I also have one more combo that I'm going to probably save for another video, because I don't think many people know about it, so stay tuned for that one. But engineering, being as prevalent as it is definitely something different from the Classic experience. Now this next one is a little bit more technical, but an absolute huge difference in the gameplay experience from back then to today. It's basically the engine, and also the fact that we're starting on the final patch 1.12, which has been rebranded for Classic to 1.13. So essentially we're playing an emulated version of Classic on the Legion engine. This makes all of your inputs very smooth and very reactive, which is quite different from playing on the 1.12 client from back in the day. Even on private servers, you would always have that input lag, and character motion just didn't feel as smooth as it does in the current game that we're getting used to already right now. This is a huge difference, and people have spoken about how melee leeway and spell batching specifically were meant to compensate for that fact, and having them in the Legion engine maybe plays out a little bit differently from how it was in the client back in the day, but I think there might be some truth to it, especially considering the ping that we're running with nowadays. I'm usually at around 20 to 30 ping, which is a far cry from the 150 ping to 200 ping that I used to play with back in the day. And obviously, like I stated earlier, but starting on 1.12 is a huge difference. We're not going through all of the patches. For instance, Ragnaros, when he first released, was borderline impossible for the guilds that were attempting him at the time back in 2005. A lot of this probably due to player skill and inexperience, but nonetheless, we're fighting a nerfed version of Rag, we're fighting a nerfed version of UBRS, and a bunch of different dungeons out there, Skolomance being obviously a big one. So the overall patch timeline that we're playing is very different from what it was back in Classic. The game was being refined. In fact, I'm fairly sure that I think Thunder Fury was initially a main hand weapon, and it got changed later on, I think in patch 1.12 maybe, even to being a one hand so you can use it in your offhand as a rogue, which is crazy to think of playing almost the entirety of vanilla without rogues being able to use Thunder Fury in their offhand, or Fury Warriors as well. I'll have to confirm that one and I'll put it on the screen though. Alright, so these last two ones are more part of the social element of the game. But some of the biggest changes that we've seen from back then to today. The first one is spell cleaves. These two are incredibly prevalent on my realm specifically, being Faralina, and I'm not sure how much of the meta of your server is affected by this same thing as well. Probably not to the same extent, but I'm pretty sure it's still quite prevalent. The first one is spell cleaves, and I guess dungeon grinding in general. This was never really a thing back in vanilla, but today it's the meta when it comes to leveling up and doing dungeons in your leveling process. Every single group that you see for almost every dungeon, especially during launch, was just spell cleaves looking for mages and warlocks, mostly mages. This made people feel almost discriminated against, I guess, to a certain extent when trying to find groups not being one of those two classes. Although I'd say if you're not happy because someone doesn't want to invite you, then just start your own group, problem solved. But nonetheless, this was not a thing back in vanilla, and now it's pretty much the meta. I know a lot of people dislike this specifically and they say it's not the classic experience, but I mean, technically it is. And honestly, I don't hate against it because it's not like playing BFA or a more modern expansion and you're just running through blindly, just AoEing everything and leveling super fast. It actually requires coordination and a good team of mages who know how to play and know how to pull the dungeon. It can be quite delicate at certain points. There's actually an element of skill. There's a lot of people who try to do this, or you see groups that start up and try to get it going, but they can't get to nearly the level of efficiency that a good coordinated group is running at. And this I think is pretty cool. You're rewarding the people that are executing at a much higher level. And obviously, when I level a warrior, I'm probably going to be tanking spell cleaves. When I level a mage, I'm probably going to be running spell cleaves. And those are the two classes that I've played forever, so I'm pretty excited on that, and I might be a little bit biased. But I leveled up the first time as a hunter, and I did do a good amount of these. I didn't really partake in the 10-man ones that were bugged with raid XP, but in BRD arena farms and LBRS stuff, I did run my own groups as a hunter. People wouldn't invite me, so I would just make my own, and I made it work with frost trap and stuff, and it was pretty enjoyable. Now the next one on this list is definitely more specific to Faralina, and it's streamers and streamer guilds. So Xfire streaming I think took off maybe in 2009, probably when Death Knights came around. I remember my friend streaming on Xfire running Holy Pally DK in the first season of Wrath of the Lich King, and that's the first time I ever heard of streaming. I don't think it was a thing in the Burning Crusade, maybe right at the end, so this was definitely not a thing back in vanilla. But today, it's definitely a massive thing, especially on my server. Most of the guilds that you see are attributed to a streamer in one way or another. In fact, the guild that I'm in is Stay Safe's guild, who's a streamer. The one issue that I have with streamer guilds is I'd say they're not really authentic in a certain way. Like, you don't really get the camaraderie and connection that you do in a more tight-knit, smaller guild. They're kind of rat races filled with hundreds of people, and it tends to get kind of cliquey. Certain people hang out with their people and then other people with others, and there's so many faces that you're seeing around all the time. It kind of loses the charm of a classic World of Warcraft guild, but it does have its upsides in the fact that there's tons of people to help you with all kinds of things. You're able to run multiple raids and spread out loot or spread out your core raiders across those raids and gear them all out and then form one mega super raid. But the number one thing that I like the most is the potential when it comes to world PvP dominance. When we head into Blackrock Mountain, we go with usually about 100 people or more, and sometimes we group up with guilds like Crusade, which is Esfan's guild, and we've gone into the Molten Mountain with, I'd say, maybe 250 people, close to 300, just steamrolling through any horde that tries to mess with us. Like anything in life, there's pros and there's cons, and I'd say in this case, the pros outweigh the cons, at least marginally. Okay, well, that's the video, guys. Those are the biggest outliers when it comes to my classic journey. These are the biggest differences that I've noticed from my experience. I'm sure I'm missing some really important ones like usual, or some that I just may have never experienced, and that's where you friendly fellows come in. If you feel like I've left out a good one, feel free to shoot it in the comment section like usual. You guys always know what's up. Also, let me know what difference has been the toughest for you to deal with personally, and which have been increases to your vanilla life, I guess, in a certain way, and that you've embraced more than anything. If you like this video and want to see more like it, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, of course, you know the drill, soldiers. Hit that notification bell to be notified every single time I post a new video straight out of the render oven. And with that out of the way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.